But it's so good to be here. Are you okay? Thank you. I've got a few people that are in agreement with me this morning. I've got my chair up here, and I don't know if I'm going to use it, but it's here in case I need it to give me some relief. I want to just say thank you. Maybe this is your first time, and maybe you're not aware of my health situation, my medical situation, but I just want to say thank you to you, all of you, my church family, who have just stood by us and lifted us up in prayer and believed for the healing in my bone infection. And I've just never felt the love of Jesus like that so tangibly in the most recent days. And so I just want to say thank you again for that. And I'm excited I get to share this morning. And it's a little weird for me because I've been out of the rhythm. How many of you guys like summer? Like, you like summer? Okay. I don't really like summer. I was going to say that. I don't like summer because I like a routine. And summer messes up with my routine. And I understand we all need rest, we all need vacation, we all need time off. But I'm a person that thrives in routine. And I'm a person that thrives in rhythms. And that's just where I live. And how many creatures of habit do I have in here? Yeah? Oh, okay, so you get me. You understand. Yes? Okay. So I get to talk with you this morning about a very well-known story, but it is actually probably my top 3 favorite Bible stories ever. And it's about the woman at the well. How many of you are familiar with that story? Mm-hmm. The woman at the well, I'll give kind of the backstory. She is a Samaritan woman, which means that she is, by the Jewish perspective, considered less than. Just even as she is born into that cultural identity, she's considered less than, because Jews considered Samaritans what they call half-breeds in the commentaries. That's what they would describe them as. And the Jews hated the Samaritan people so much that they would not go anywhere near them, because they thought even breathing the same air could make them unclean. And so this woman who's born into this cultural identity of a Samaritan woman, we don't have a lot of history about her life and how she got to the place that she was when Jesus met her. But Jesus meets her, and she has been married 5 times, and she's living with the 6th guy. And so a lot of times what we focus on about this narrative about her life is that. We focus on the mistakes maybe that she's made, or the immorality that she has lived in. And we miss sometimes the power in the story. And the fact that this is, by the way, the longest recorded conversation between Jesus and another person in the entire Bible, okay? This is the longest recorded conversation. I don't know how long the conversations were with Peter or with John the Baptist that aren't recorded, but what I can tell you is this is the longest recorded conversation that Jesus ever had with an individual. It was an immoral woman that had a cultural identity that was already less than. And so that should tell you something about who Jesus is today. That should encourage you right there. I don't even need to say anything else. It's because that's who Jesus is. He made a way. He met her where she was at, in her state of brokenness, in the narrative that she had maybe written about herself or told about herself, or what other people had spoken about her, and he still met her. He still found her valuable enough to take his time and sit with her at the well. And so I'm going to break down the story today. But before I do, I want to just highlight what our series has been about, is about in the room. These are conversations with Jesus that individuals had with Jesus that were transformational. And every time there was a transformation that happened in somebody when they sat down and talked with Jesus, it always translated outward. You see, somebody else benefited from their transformation. And so when we're talking about conversations that changed everything. It's not just the conversation with Jesus that you have or that I have with him or that these people had with him. It's the conversations that happen as a result of those transformations. Because this woman that I'm going to share with you about this morning, she actually became the biggest evangelist to her village. All the people in her village went to find out about Jesus, and they came and believed in him as a result of her testimony. And so the transformational conversations that these people have and that we have with Jesus are meant to translate into other cultures, into other people's lives. Everybody in this room has somebody that they know that needs a transformational conversation. Everybody in this room. I have it. I have those people. You have those people. And so we can learn a lot from each of these conversations. But let's look at Colossians 4:6. Colossians 4:6 says, "Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone." That is kind of the headline verse for this series of In the Room and these conversations with Jesus. But what is gracious speech? When Paul is talking, Paul is writing these to the Colossians, and he's saying, let your conversations be full of grace. What is gracious speech? Gracious speech does not excuse sin, but it conveys truth in a tone that invites rather than repels. It's about our tone. Gracious speech means that we're not saying that like the woman at the well who her life choices were all right. We're not saying that our life choices are all right, but what gracious speech is it conveys a tone that invites people into the conversation rather than repels them. You know, it's interesting that it says seasoned with salt. Salt is a cleanser. It's a cleanser. When I had my toe infection, it's a bone infection that's in my toe. What the doctor told me to do to help cleanse it was to put it in Epsom salt, soak it in warm water with Epsom salt, because it would cleanse it. Okay, so our conversations with people, if they're to be gracious, our conversations with people outside of this room, also inside this room, but outside of this room, if they're to be gracious speech, they're to cleanse, right? And you can't do that if you have a tone that's condescending or condemning, right? And so we're going to see how Jesus speaks to this woman and how his tone shifted her life. But really what I want to talk about today is a narrative, a storyline, something that we tell ourselves. Actually, the definition of a narrative, I have it here, is a narrative is a report of connected events, real or imaginary, presented in a sequence of written or spoken words or still or moving images or both. And so the word derives from the Latin verb narrar, which means to tell. So a few years ago, Kennedy, she was about maybe four or five, such a precious age. And she had a nanny her name was Danae. Many of you maybe remember Danae. She moved away years ago, but Kennedy was in this stage of her life where she was really into My Little Pony. And she had this imaginary My Little Pony that was named Rainbow Snow. And Rainbow Snow could fly. And she had all kinds of descriptions about who Rainbow Snow was. And so one day I get home, or I pick her up and I put her in the car and we're going home. And she's telling me about a story that happened. And the narrative is that, okay, Danae came and picked me up, and she says it in her cute little 4-year-old voice. And she's like, and Nay picked me up, and then we went to get ice cream, and then we went to do this, and these are all real things that happened. And then somewhere along the way in the narrative, she goes, and then Rainbow Snow was flying outside of the car, and she saw me, and we were talking about my favorite flavor of ice cream, Mom. And I go, oh, really? Rainbow Snow was there? And she's like, yep, dead serious. Okay, so these are narratives. So part of what the narrative was, what she was sharing with me was both real and imaginary, right? And sometimes we do the same thing. Sometimes the narrative that we share with others or the narrative that we're telling ourselves has very real parts of our story. There are very real things that we have gone through. There's very real struggles that we have. But sometimes there are imaginary things that get thrown in there based off of the way we interpret something. Maybe the way that we interpret a comment, or maybe the way that we interpret like a potential action from somebody else, how they said something, and then we create a narrative out of that. Can I give you an example? Okay, so a couple years ago, there was a new mom at Kennedy's school, and she was joining the carpool that I'm a part of for this play that she was in. And so carpool is really important to me because I live 100 miles away, and I drive all the time. And so carpool is really important for me to dial in and lock in on. And this new mom had gotten on the text thread, and she was like, I don't know if I can make it to pick up Kennedy because, of like where she's going to be located, and, it's just going to be really hard with my other kids and all of this stuff. And I had interpreted that because I was willing to go out of my way to pick up her kid and to pick up all these other kids. I had interpreted that with a little bit of annoyance, a little bit of offense. And I was like, wait a second, like, you're not going to be able to, like, help out my kid, but I'm going to be doing this for your kid. And it was all through text message, which, by the way, if this text do not communicate tone well, you have to work really hard in your text messages if you're going to communicate the right tone, okay? That's why face-to-face conversations, much better, okay? But because of the way the text came through, I took it as spoken in a particular tone, which made me create a narrative about this woman that maybe wasn't true. And I started going down a little bit of a spiral rabbit hole of offense. And this is what we do. And so that becomes part of the narrative. You see, I've learned, though, in my life that if I don't want to walk in offense now with this person or with this woman, I have to have a conversation. I have to have a clarifying conversation so that the narrative is clear, so the narrative is correct. And so I send her a text and I say, hey, I just wanted to clarify, like, what you said there, and I wanted to ask you, like, if you could just maybe explain a little bit more to me about what that meant so that I'm clear on what it is that you're willing to do for the carpool situation. And she was like, and she was super gracious, and she was super sweet, and she was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that I maybe said it that way and it came out that way. That was not my intent. I can 100% pick up your daughter. I can do all of that. This was just what was going on in my mind. Now, do you see how that could have created a narrative had I not had a clarifying conversation? It could have created a narrative in me, and it could have created offense in me, and then I would just be walking around with that offense. I would just be carrying that with me all the time. The reason why I'm talking to you about narratives today is because this woman had a narrative that she was living and breathing and walking in, that she was carrying around shame. She was carrying around maybe isolation in her life. She was carrying around sickness. She was carrying things with her all the time, these narratives. And Jesus himself was saying, what went into her story. He interrupts her story because he's like, I have better for you. I have a different life for you. I do not have a life that is in isolation, carved out of isolation, or is defined by your sin. I have a life for you that is full of purpose, that is full of evangelism, that's full of bringing other people towards me, okay? And so that's where I want to kind of go today. I have 3 different words that start with the word I. And I wanted to do it that way because I hope it kind of sticks and it helps you kind of reflect back maybe this week on having 3 different I words of what Jesus does in our narrative. Okay? So let's go to John chapter 4. We're going to pick up with verse 1. It says, now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John. Although, in fact, it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. And so he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria. And so he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. And it was about noon. I just want to pause. So the fact that that little detail is in there, that it was about noon, is really important to the story, and it gives us insight into what was going on in her narrative. Because nobody went to the well at noon. If you went to the well to gather water for the day, you would either go in the evening when it was cooler or in the early morning when it was cooler. And so the detail here that John puts in the story is really important to understand, that this woman went out of her way in the most uncomfortable, hot part of the day to fill up this water jar. Now, I have a little water jar here, and I thought, to be honest, I thought it was much bigger. Amazon made it look like it was much bigger. So this is not an accurate size of a water jar that this woman would have been carrying. It's probably 10 times too small. Okay, so think about that. Think about having something that's 10 times heavier than this and then carrying it full of water back to your home in the heat of the day, in the hottest part of the day. Like, it is like 93 degrees in here, I feel like. And I'm like, I can't imagine carrying something like this. And it's like the hottest part of the day. So in noontime, that's when she would go to draw water. This is important because she would not be seen by other people. We can derive that her life was maybe made up of a lot of scrutiny, a lot of scorn. That maybe the townspeople had gossiped about her, or that she had this reputation of bouncing around from marriage to marriage. And so she didn't want to deal maybe with all of the scrutiny and all of the scorn and all of the shame that she might feel. And so that detail is really, really important to know about her narrative. Let's go to verse 7. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food. This is also important because he takes time to zero in on her. He takes time to be personal with her. It's important to note that they were alone, because when you get alone with Jesus, when you zero in on him, you realize that he's been there waiting to talk to you all along. He's been waiting to give you an encounter with his presence all along. Okay, but sometimes we don't know how to get alone. We don't know how to carve out time and fix our eyes on him. You know that if you want the perfect peace that passes all understanding, Isaiah 26:3 says, "You will keep in perfect peace those whose eyes are fixed on you, or their minds are steadfast." If we want to walk in a place of peace, we've got to get our eyes on him and get alone with him. Verse 9, and then the Samaritan woman said to him, "You're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." Can you see what's coming through in her language? There's this like suspicion almost of like, what do you want, first of all? And why are you talking to me? Because you don't talk to me because of who I am, okay? So there's this identity issue that's in play happening. There's this level of shame about who she is, and she's saying, "Who are you?" And so my first I word for you today about the narrative is that Jesus interrupts the narrative. So what we see here in the beginning of the story is her living out her narrative. She's walking around, carrying her water jar, carrying her shame, carrying her sin, and she's doing the same routine, going back and forth from the well at noon every day, living in this place of shame, living in this place of bondage, okay? That's the narrative that we see, and now he's interrupting the narrative. How many of you can say that you have a narrative that you've been living or walking in, and Jesus interrupted it? Thank the Lord. Like a level of shame or a level of sin in your life, and you met him in such a real way. Anybody have a testimony this morning, or is it just me? Okay, we got one guy over here that's got a testimony. Ooh, we're going to need to do a salvation call at the end of this. Y'all, you guys are quiet today. Why are you so quiet? Oh, thank you. Oh, is that what it is? Yeah, okay, for Khalid, he's quiet. I'm so sorry about the heat. Guys, I'm sorry. It's hot in here. Okay, but I know we're going to get there this morning. We're going to be encouraged. Okay, so up until this point, she's been walking around with her water jar day after day, carrying the thing around to the well at noon. Okay, so this is about cycles, and this is about patterns and narratives. Our narrative that can be created from being embedded in a cycle that gets repeated over and over, therefore becomes what our life looks like. There are cycles of shame. There are cycles of regret. There are cycles of guilt. There are cycles of addiction. There are cycles of angry outbursts and temper tantrums. There are cycles of all kinds, okay? But for the sake of it, I believe, and I'm going to want to talk about a cycle of shame this morning because that's what I believe she was walking in as a result of her decisions and maybe as a result of her identity. I talked to you about how she was a Samaritan, and that is at the root of who she was, her cultural identity, okay? And so when we talk about what's at the root of us as our identity in Christ, okay, everything else flows from that, okay? So there are results that flow from the roots, and what was in the root of her identity was unhealed shame. And if the root of who we are holds unhealed shame, there will be results of those wounds that continue the cycle. You see, we always focus on the results of the wounds or the roots. We always hone in on a part of the story where she was married 5 times, and then in the 6th relationship, she's not even married to the guy. So we hone in on the result of the issue, but we never look at the root. And what Jesus does when he interrupts our narrative is he starts looking at the root. He starts saying, what's on the inside of you? Who do you believe that you are? Who do you believe I think that you are? And so if our roots aren't healthy, our results will reflect that. Our behaviors will reflect that. We will make decisions based off of what we believe about ourselves and at the core of who we are. Okay, so if the root of who we are holds unhealed shame, there will be results of those wounds that continue the cycle. When I was in high school, a lot of you know my testimony, but I made a lot of dumb decisions, particularly with relationships with boys. And so I can identify with this girl who jumped around from relationship to relationship, looking maybe and searching for validation in those relationships. And in high school, I did the same thing. I had really a root of rejection that I was carrying. And the results of that, the results of a root of rejection is constantly needing validation and approval from somebody else, from external sources, not from the source, but from outside. And so it didn't matter to me who it was, just as long as I had somebody that was attached to me that would validate my existence, that would validate my value. And if I didn't have plans every Friday night, I would have a panic attack because that meant that I wasn't worthy, I wasn't valuable, nobody wanted me. And so the results of a bad root system always show up on the external, but what we do is we judge based off of results and not meet people at the root. But what Jesus does is he interrupts that narrative because he's saying, no more is this root system going to be toxic. No more is this root system going to be diseased. No more are people going to be judging you based off the results of a toxic root system. I'm coming to heal the root. I'm coming to heal who you are. Right? All right, come on. Let's go. You're with me. You see, shame always seeks to devalue. And once it's embraced, results in people hiding and isolating. You see, she embraced the shame. She embraced the narrative that either she was telling herself or that other people had said about her. She embraced it. And that resulted in a level of hiding and isolation. We see it all over the scriptures, that when shame enters your story, you start to hide. Okay, you can hide yourself in addiction. You maybe actually isolate yourself from other people. When you feel a sense of shame and you don't feel comfortable with letting that thing into the light, maybe it's trauma, maybe it's a decision you made. If you are not comfortable letting that into the light, it's very difficult to heal. But look at how good Jesus is he interrupts the narrative. Amen. He came to her, by the way. A lot of times we say you've got to strive and reach for him. And I believe that if you want to have a relationship with Christ that is life-giving and is something that is a well of joy and peace and abundance flowing up out of you, you do have to pursue him. But what's good about him is that he comes to us, is that he came to her right in the middle of her story. He came to us to interrupt our narrative of sin. He came to us to die on the cross so that our narrative and the stuff we keep carrying around and that we think will always have... when illustrations go wrong. Okay, I'm just going to leave that off because I want to return this. I don't want to keep this. I need to return it to Amazon. This is not the right size. Anyway, I was on a roll there, and now that just totally threw me off, y'all. The things that we carry that become part of our identity and our narrative, thank you, that we carry around. Jesus is the one he's interrupting the story saying, put that thing down. You're not called to carry that anymore. We talked about identity in our soul care series a few weeks ago, and I felt like this was appropriate to bring back about our value. The author had this really great statement, and he said, the issue of my value was settled at the cross. And I think that we constantly need reminders of that. We constantly need to be reminded. That's why I wanted to bring that back into this message today, is that this woman had an issue with her value, that she had been devalued by a narrative that she had spoken over herself or that other people had spoken over her, okay? And Jesus came to interrupt that narrative. He came to interrupt any narrative that you may carry, that your performance is who you are, that you are only as good as the best success you've had at work, or how much money you've made. And I want to tell you today that Jesus interrupts that narrative, and he says the issue of your value is not based off of how good you do or how bad you do. The issue of your value is not based on how high you achieve or how bad you fail. It actually has nothing to do with it, okay? I've got a lot of performers in this room. I'm one myself. And so I understand what it feels like to walk around with a bad root system, thinking that I've got to perform for people to validate me or to approve of me, or I've got to achieve a certain level to be considered successful. And I want you to know that it's not how good you do or how bad you do that is the issue. The issue of your value is that you were valuable because he died for you. You were valuable because he said, I got to interrupt the narrative of shame that we're walking in. I've got to interrupt the narrative of hopelessness, of depression, anxiety, sickness. I'm going to interrupt the narrative because you're worth it. And that's it. Not because of anything you do, not because of how you look, not because of how you carry yourself or you don't carry yourself. Jesus Christ said you were worth it even before you were born. Before you were in the womb, he knew you. And he called you valuable. Man, you guys, I'm having a hard time up here. All right. I want to say this before I go back into the text. He doesn't just heal the roots. He changes the results. He didn't come just to tell you that you were loved and worthy and valuable. That's the first part. He doesn't just heal the root. Now he changes the result of our life. Your life trajectory looks different because he heals the root, but also he's going to change the results of what those behaviors have done in your life, okay? Back to the text. In verse 10, Jesus answered her. Okay, so we're going from verse 9 where she says, you're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan. How can you ask me for a drink? Jews don't associate with Samaritans. Now, verse 10, Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. My second I word is he inserts himself into the narrative. So he first interrupts the toxic narrative and then he inserts himself into it. You see, he's not a God that's distant. He's not a God that stands up here on a high mountain and dictates about your life from a far distance. You see, he interrupts a narrative that is harmful to you, and then he inserts himself into it. He comes into the story because we need him. We need closeness with him. We need proximity to him if we're going to heal. Now look at in verse 11. She says, sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock? Jesus answered, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. What Jesus is referencing is the Holy Spirit. That's what that is. If you never want to feel thirsty or empty again, you have to have the Holy Spirit. And Jesus is saying, I'm going to give it to you right now, girl. That's what he's saying. If you don't want to be thirsty again, I'm going to give you what you really need, which is my Spirit. Okay? The woman said to him, now look at this. Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming back here to draw water. I can just hear her tone, right? Like the way I just said that, it was like this, almost this desperate anger. Like, yeah, give that to me, because I'm tired of living like this. And I don't know who's in here today hearing this, but you might be living out a narrative that you're kind of tired of. Maybe you're tired of constantly feeling anxious. Maybe you're tired of constantly living under a cloud of depression. Maybe you're constantly tired of living in shame because of decisions that someone else won't let you forget. Carrying around the water jar. Narrative day in and day out. I don't know who that is for. But he's here to insert himself into your narrative. Look at how once he offered her all that he is, the living water, his Holy Spirit, that deep satisfaction and joy, she was ready to leave the life that she had become comfortable with and not go back. I don't think she knew that at the time, but she was ready to let everything go. Everything that she had become comfortable with, because she was so uncomfortable in her sin. She was so uncomfortable in the narrative and the life that she was living. And Jesus is inserting himself into that narrative, and he's saying, look, there's something better. There is something better than what you have settled for. And here's what I want to say to you. Your story or that narrative begins at the point of no return. It is the point of no return to the old life. It is the point of no return to that bad habit. It's the point of no return. You see, she finally maybe was able to look at the life that she had maybe created and been walking in and saying, yeah, I'm not going back to that anymore. I'm done. I'm leaving that here. But she had to get thirsty enough. She had to get desperate enough for him. When I know that, do you guys remember the story that Todd told a couple months ago about the roller coaster that we got stuck on? You know that story? Yeah. He told it from a different perspective, but I'm going to tell you something about that story that has a point for this. So we get stuck on this roller coaster that's like 1,000 feet in the air, like over the top of the I-5 corridor, and it was at this place called Enchanted Village in Washington. And so we were with our couple's small group as a young married couple, and these guys had the maturity level of a napkin, and so they were like sitting in this like stalled cart, and they're like rocking back and forth. And me, who has this severe fear of heights, when I'm squeezed in that spot, stuff comes out. You know, that's not always holy. And I was just like, I was mad, and I was like saying things, and I was just like, stop it, you guys, stop. And they were like doing this. So I'm like in this state of panic, because I'm like, I don't know when I'm going to get down. How do I get back down there? And so this guy, which after he comes up, this guy walks up the stairs. Did you know they have these little staircases on the roller coasters? I had no idea. The guy who's running it walks up the staircase as if he's taking a walk, you know, on the beach, like no big thing. And I look at him, and I'm like, how are we going to get down from here? And where have you been? Like, seriously, it was like maybe 2 minutes, but like it feels like an eternity when you're hanging on for dear life. And so I'm like, where have you been? And how do we get back down there? And he goes, ma'am, he said, unfortunately, if you want to get back down to the ground where you need to be, you have to go through it. You can't go back. And I was like, I don't understand. I'm on a stalled roller coaster. I'm hanging on for dear life right now, and you're going to make me ride this thing out to get back to safety. And he was like, I'm very sorry, ma'am, but you can't go back from where you came from. You have to go through this to get to where you need to be. The point of that story, again, is that she got to a point, the Samaritan woman got to a point of no return. She had to stop looking backwards, because the life that she wanted and the life that he had for her was not back there. it was in front. And where she needed to go when he interrupts her narrative and he's now inserting himself into the narrative, where she needed to go as a woman who was whole and full of purpose and not weighed down by shame, she had to go to a place of no return, okay? What you are unwilling to return to when it comes to sin will determine how fully you can step into what he has for you. What you are unwilling to return to when it comes to sin will determine how fully you can step into what he has for you. Your story or your narrative, that new narrative maybe that you're seeking today, begins at the point of no return. What are some things that God is asking you not to return to? Because he's saying, I have so much more in front of you. I have so much more purpose. This woman became the greatest evangelist to that village. The whole village came to know Jesus because of her unwillingness to go back to a life and a cycle and a narrative that was defining. Now let's go to verse 16. Now this is where he brings up her sin. He told her, go, call your husband and come back. I have no husband, she replied. Jesus said to her, you are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true. Sir, the woman said, I can see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. Woman, Jesus replied, believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. What he was proclaiming was, salvation comes from me. What you're seeking comes from me, right here. And yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth. And the woman said, I know that the Messiah, called Christ, is coming. And when he comes, he will explain to us. He will explain everything to us. And then Jesus declared, I, the one speaking to you, am he. You see, in his revelation of his own identity, he restored hers. You see, when her narrative was one of shame and others of her was one of judgment, his narrative, the mark that he placed on her, erased all of the other narratives, all of the other labels that she was wearing. What once read shame and judgment now reads redeemed and restored. Because he interrupts the narrative, he inserts himself, and number 3, he's intentional to change the narrative. Verse 27, just then his disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking with a woman. But no one asked, what do you want? Or why are you talking with her? Then, leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? And they came out of the town and made their way towards him. The end of that story is just as I shared with you, that the townspeople all did go to him, and they became believers as a result of her testimony. Because she decided that a new narrative that she wanted about her life was found at the point of no return. And so leaving her water jar, John makes a point to say she left it behind. She left what was holding her back behind, her cycle of shame, her sin, her hopelessness. She left it behind so that she could follow Jesus and she could do what she was called to do, was to tell the village about him. Khalid, I'll have you come up and join me as I close this morning. You see, I wonder if the ability for her to release something that was so much a part of who she is or who she was had to do with what she first had to receive. See, a lot of times we say you have to release something out of your hands, right, to receive. But I actually want to make the point today that you have to receive something first before you can release. You see, what happened in between this narrative between Jesus and her, as he interrupted the narrative and he inserts himself into it, he initiates change in her narrative by healing her. But the way he heals her is because she was able to receive a grace, receive a forgiveness that she knew she didn't deserve. And when we understand that grace, like when we understand the weight of sin and how it stained our Lord and Savior, our sin stained him, that his blood had to be shed for. When we receive the message of that grace, we're able to leave whatever we need to leave behind. When we get so tired of living in a narrative that is empty and dry without him, sometimes maybe the narrative is our relationship with Christ can't grow because all we ever do is ask him for stuff. We never sit at his feet. We never listen for his voice. Maybe that's the narrative that you're carrying today. Maybe it's not a narrative of shame and sin, but maybe it's a narrative of like, I can't get beyond this level in my relationship with God because I'm not willing to sit at his feet and listen. I'm not willing to pour out my heart to him in the secret place. I think I shared last week that my absolute favorite song right now is called What a God, and it's by SEU Worship. And there's this one line in it that gets me every time. And it says, if the highest place I reach is at your feet, I've done it all. If the best thing that I see is your glory, I've seen it all. He says, no treasure of this life can ever satisfy. It's his presence. It's being with him. It's allowing him to change the narrative that you've been walking in. I'll have you stand to your feet. The day that my narrative changed, many of you have heard my testimony before, but I'm not apologetic about it. I'm going to share it again, and I'm going to shout it to the rooftops. This woman's testimony has been shared for thousands of years, and it has still changed every person, I believe, that has heard it, if they've let the word in. And so my testimony was that I was living in a drug house in college. I had been raised in the church. I had known about Jesus, but I never knew Jesus. I never knew how to talk to him. I never knew how to hear him. And I was living in a house that was full of drugs and sexual sin and all kinds of destruction. And one night I got so tired of being treated poorly by the roommates, my friends that lived with me. I got so tired of it, I called Todd and I said, I want to go home. And he said, what does that mean? And I said, I want to go to church. I know where I need to be. My narrative that I've been living is not the narrative anymore that he has for me. I have been running from a narrative that he has called me into. And I said, I got to go home. I am tired of living this life. I'm tired of being thirsty and not being fulfilled. I'm tired of being lonely and constantly around people. I'm tired of living unsatisfied and depressed and anxious. I'm tired of it. And Todd was with me. He saw me in that whole season, and he was a faithful friend at that point. And he said, all right, we're going to church. It was a Wednesday night. It was City Church in Kirkland, Washington. That church isn't there anymore. But that was the church service that I went to. It was a young adult service, or it was a youth service, I think. It was like a teenage service. And I didn't care where I was going. I just said, I know I need to get back into his presence. I need to meet with Jesus. And I'll tell you what, I tell people all the time, I was dressed inappropriately for church, if you know what I mean. I probably smelled like beer and cigarettes, and I tell that part of the story too. But I walked into that church, and he met me right where I was at. You see, he interrupted my narrative, and he inserted himself into it, and he has initiated a change in my life that will be sustained throughout my generation and hopefully into my children's lives and the next generation, because this is what our God does. This is what Jesus does. He can do it for you. He did it for me. And so I want to pray for you this morning.